Hello, BookTube. I recently saw a tag on Samuel Daram's channel that I wanted to do. It's an AuthorTube tag. When I saw this, when I go to Samuel's channel, whenever I go to his channel, it's one of those BookTube, AuthorTube channels where the first thought I have when I look at the channel is, why doesn't this person have 15,000 subscribers? I don't understand how that sort of thing works in BookTube and AuthorTube. But he did an AuthorTube Newbie Tag 2.0. That I wanted to do. He himself is a working author. He's a playwright, and he's working on a novel about the Sri Lankan Civil War. And he came up with a list of fantastic AuthorTube type questions that I want to do, and that I want to ask you to do as well. Number one is, what's your book pitch? And if you have more than one work, then just choose your favorite. And mine would be something along the lines of, for almost as long as there have been books in human history, there have been people writing about those books. And as printing has proliferated, more and more readers have depended on that writing and read it almost to the exclusion of the books the writing is about. And it's achieved an art form of its own. And that body of writing about books by fellow authors, by lifelong critics, by amateurs, that what I call an ink chorus is a fascinating counterpoint to the whole body of human literature. And that is a book that I would very much like to write, a book called Ink Chorus, that is a history of book criticism. Not schools of thought, not academic, but a history of what forms it has taken, who's been really good at it, who's been really quotable about it, and how the form itself has grown. What characteristics it has taken on over 5,000 years. I would love to do that. I just love to do that. Put some of those whole bookcases full of book reviews that I have to work. So the book that I choose, there are many works that I have sort of in one stage or another of progress, and Ink Chorus is one that's been on my mind lately as something I would really like to do, especially because one of my goals for 2019, which I have not given up on at all, is to make an ebook of my collected book reviews of 2018, which would include a long introduction, which would certainly touch on philosophical and broader aspects of book reviewing in general, and that includes not only all of the reviews all in one place instead of you subscribing to 6 different newspapers, but also extra material, introductions to each of those reviews, follow-ups on those reviews, especially in cases where I change my mind. Stuff like a book like that is still on my docket to do for 2019, so this has been on my mind. Question number 2, if you were a book, how would you pitch yourself? I'm a searing indictment of man's inhumanity to man. I will make you laugh, I'll make you cry. You'll see me more times than cats. I have no idea how I would pitch myself as a book. I am incredibly, immoderately passionate and non-jaded about all aspects of books and reading. I absolutely love it as much as the day that its wonder was first introduced to me. But I don't know how you would make that as a book, as a book pitch. And also, when it comes to books, I will not fluff or massage. I am when it comes to dealing directly with you under my own name, I am as honest as I know how to be. So I guess that would be part of a book pitch as well. Number 3 is, what do you usually write? And I think in the context here, this probably means what kind of fiction do you usually write? I could be selling Samuel short on that. He seems like a fairly broad thinker. But BookTube, AuthorTube, they're usually talking about fiction. And when it comes to fiction, usually what I write is historical fiction of one kind or another. Every once in a while, I will branch out into science fiction or fantasy, or even contemporary fiction. I just recently wrote contemporary fiction, but usually not. But in the literal answer to the question, what do you usually write? Well, the literal answer to that is book reviews. I usually write book reviews. I write a couple of them a day. So that definitely takes precedence if you're talking just about bulk. Question number 4, what's something you will never write? I loved Samuel's answer to this, which is, of course, you can't say that never to anything. You don't know that. He was talking in terms of the artistic challenge. how could he possibly limit himself by saying, I'll never write a rom-com, or I'll never write a western, or I'll never write a horror story, when if you are truly literarily talented, and I get the sneaking suspicion that he is, then how on earth could you couldn't possibly do that. You couldn't possibly say, well, here's the thing that I will never write, because you don't know what you would be able to do with it. I love that. I absolutely love that feeling, and in a much, much lesser way, I feel the same way. I have tried really hard to think about a kind of thing that I just on principle wouldn't write, and I really can't come up with one. Even like, for instance, the low-hanging fruit, the obvious extreme answer here would be a religious autobiography, the kind of extremely empathetic and often borderline crackpot religious autobiography that I read so many of, at least one a day, and write about so many of them, and so I have a ringside seat at how utterly ridiculous they can be. But when they're not, they're wonderful. When they're not, they become immortal works of literature, like Surprised by Joy by C.S. Lewis. So and I'm not sure that I couldn't do such a thing. So even there, I wouldn't rule it out. Let's see here. Question number 5 is, what's your goal for starting an AuthorTube channel? I don't actually have an AuthorTube channel. I only have this one channel. Lots of people I have in the last few months, best idea I ever had on this channel, I have in the last few months been reminding you all that you can email me about anything you want. There is the ordinary YouTube attitude is that I'm a YouTuber and I'm making videos for y'all or you guys or fam, but I actually don't want any kind of personal contact with you, and you to try in any way to find out my address, my email, anything like that, I'll call the police, I'll have you arrested, I'll prosecute you to the fullest extent of the law, all that sort of thing. I guess there's a kind of real-world practicality in that, but there's also an element of that that's always struck me as deeply hypocritical. The kind of bored 18-year-old drug addict gamer who has 180,000 subscribers and goes to VidCon but insists that all of his fans stay behind a velvet rope, and he will occasionally stick out a finger to flick it along their outstretched hands, but no conversations. No, nothing like that. No, they'll tear you apart, man. Nobody knows who you are. Nobody knows and nobody cares who you are. But how did I get on this subject? Oh, right. Right. Many of the people that I have been emailing with have said, it's interesting that you don't make a separate channel or more than one. Why don't you do that? You, for instance, a number of you have pointed out something that I didn't think was completely obvious on this channel. Some of you have pointed out, listening to you talk about TV and movies is some of you have been nice enough to say that it can be very satisfying. More satisfying, some of you have said, than the YouTube channels that are exclusively devoted to movies and TV, and I really appreciate that. Some of you have thought, is it possible that you have done some of this for an audience and that you haven't told us about it? One way or another, that the idea of a movie channel or TV channel has come up, and so has an AuthorTube channel. People have often asked, why don't you start a separate channel for AuthorTube? I don't know. I kind of like the idea of just one channel. I mean, it's got my name on it, and you're all here anyway. So my goal for starting an AuthorTube channel wouldn't be to start an AuthorTube channel, but it would be maybe to make more writing-related videos. That I could easily see as a real goal. I think I have a lot to say on the subject, and I would love to do it, so maybe I will. Question number 6 is, what made you want to start writing? There's a small answer to this, and there's a big answer to this. The small answer is science fiction and fantasy. I was reading a science fiction and fantasy, what was it? It was a fantasy series. This was a long time ago, and I don't quite remember what the series was. I could, if I really tried or went back in my reading notebooks, I could. But I remember vividly struggling to the end of the second volume in a trilogy. This was way back when authors stopped at trilogies. And thinking literally, in fact, I think I said it out loud to a bed full of beagles. I said, I could do better than this. Because there were major plot lines that were being dropped. There were major characters who were being inconsistently portrayed from one book to the next. And what was clearly intended to be an irresistible cliffhanger at the end of the second volume was bad. It was weak. that was the small thing. After that, I started doing science fiction and fantasy serialized installments. That I would type them on a manual typewriter and then bring them to a copy shop and have 10 copies made and mail them out to 10 people who were willing to read them. And then that number kept going up to 15 and 20 and 21. And I started getting Brother or Tandy word processors that weighed 50 pounds, but that would allow me to make many copies myself. And those were all pot boilers, and they taught me a lot, and they were terrific fun to write, just terrific fun. So that is the small scale answer. The large scale answer to what made me want to start writing applies to all the rest of you, whether you know it or not. I reached a point where I thought, well, okay, I have been consuming, I have been absorbing for all this time, and it's changed me. It's made me the recognizable person that I am now, and it has filled me with wonder and joy. It's made my skin just tingle with electricity in that way that terrific writing does. And I reached a point, the larger answer to this question is I reached the point where I realized that there's something wrong with only absorbing and never trying to return that favor. There's something wrong with doing that. And I don't agree at all with the mind frame that has been largely the case unquestioned for 5,000 years, which is that the people who return that favor are the creative people. Everybody's creative. Everybody has stories to tell. And you have never had a better opportunity to do that. The technology exists now for you to tell those stories for a large audience for free, in a way and with an acceptance that for most of history did not exist. Absolutely did not exist. If you go back, I don't even know, 5 generations in Samuel's family, or 5 generations in mine, you will find yourself plunked down immediately in a world where almost nobody in that family had any means, opportunity, or encouragement to give back creatively, to generate something creatively. Almost nobody in the family. In my own case, it would have been literally nobody. And I'd be willing to bet in the back of your family tree, you don't have to go back very far for the elements that are around you all today that are so easy, so wonderfully encouraging, simply weren't there. In fact, there were discouragements. So the larger impetus of why to start writing is the same, applies to me and also to you, which is that if you have gone this long just absorbing and never giving back, it's time to really think about giving back. You have a voice. It may be the hardest, the last thing for you to discover, and you have stories to tell. It may take time for you to learn what they are, but the key here is that you have the ability to do it, the means. And that means you are incumbent. It means you have the responsibility to do it as well, because your individual voice is different from everyone else's, and somewhere down the line, in the future, 5 generations from now, somebody wants to hear your voice. It's going to work for them in a way that nobody else's does, not even mine. You owe it to that person to put your voice in the world. Think of how many voices we don't have because for 5,000 years they had no means, no opportunity, and no encouragement. And think how much richer we'd be if we had those voices. Well, we have the opportunity now. So the larger answer to this question is I started writing because I had to. It's my duty to, as poncy as that sounds, and it's your duty too. So get on it. Wouldn't an AuthorTube channel by me be really great? Let's see here. Question number 7 is, what is your publication path? Self-published, traditional publishing, that sort of thing. Again, I don't know if I'm an anomalous answer to these questions. The publishing path that I would take in terms of a book would be to self-publish. I would absolutely do that. I would self-publish so that I could determine the price, and it would be $1. So that I could determine everything about it, what it looks like. I would be beholden to no one. I would not ever have to face the nightmare of having a marketing team in New York call me in for a meeting. We're not going to reimburse you for the plane fare. Just come here, or your contract's canceled. And then sit me down at the table, a whole bunch of people who immediately, with that reader sense that we all have, you know that you're the only reader in the room. And yet these people are all making demands. They're telling you things that you're going to change about your book. They're not asking you. They're telling you. And you just have to do that. Or your contract is voided and you give back your advance. And that's a nightmare. And I don't want to go through it. I don't want anyone to have any say in my book except me. So the path will definitely be self-publishing when I do it. later in this year when I do it. But the technical, again, the technical answer to the question, what is your path to publication? For me, is I write a book review and then I send it in to an editor, and in a week, 2 weeks, it's published. Sometimes even shorter than that if there's a hole in the coverage. So it's a weird thing about AuthorTube, which is I have no books to my credit on Amazon or anywhere else. I have no published works to my credit on Amazon or anywhere else, unlike Samuel and a whole bunch of other people on AuthorTube. And yet I am published somewhere at least once a week. More than that sometimes. And have been for a very long time, as some of you have been pointing out to me. I'm like Virginia Creeper all over the Republic of Letters. You can find me everywhere. This is true. So seeing work of mine that has been published with my name on it for a large reading audience is not a new experience to me at all. It would be an odd week if that didn't happen. but in terms of books, self-publishing is the route that I will take. And I will be hitting up quite a few of you. Matt, Paperback Junkie, and a whole bunch of other people. As you know from watching this channel with weird backlighting and no technical expertise whatsoever, and as several of you have pointed out, that hair, not a problem Samuel has to deal with. I have no technical ability whatsoever. So I'm going to be leaning very heavily on the rest of you for designing this book and all other books. Question number 8 is, what content do you bring to the AuthorTube table? In terms of videos, when I talk about writing, I get a good response from the rest of you. I tend to talk about writing in a way that is slightly different from most AuthorTube channels that I have seen, because there's nothing artsy-fartsy or dreamy about my AuthorTube content at all. The number one thing that I like to do, that I've always liked to do, I used to teach writing. I learned writing at a workshop, and I used to teach it, and I've encouraged lots of people, I've helped lots of people to write, and the number one thing constant in all of that is that I'm never talking about the acts that we take to the frozen ice of the oceans inside us or anything like that. No. It's work, and it's a muscle, and you have that muscle, so you can do that work. You just need to do it every day, regularly, whether you feel like it or not, whether the muse is there or not, whether you have your special blend of tea with your special biscuit that you dunk, and they were out of my biscuits, so I guess it's no writing for me this week till I go back to the grocery store next week. Wish I could, but no. The content that I bring to the AuthorTube table is a nice, healthy shot of the Jesuits. Question number 9, what is your biggest writing struggle? For me, I'm assuming this means fiction, but for me it's plot, especially in plot-heavy genres like science fiction or mystery or even romance. Plotting, it's the devil of a tough time for me, mainly because, as you've heard on this channel a million times, plotting in the made-up stories always strikes me as its Achilles heel. Plotting is where it shows what it is, how silly it is. And so when it comes to plotting, I always feel like, well, okay, you have to have this happen in order for that to happen, and you have to make sure that this happens at the time when this is happening. And I think, well, do you? Has anybody been doing that for your life? No. And yet your life story is still interesting. It just seems so artificial. I just don't have the mind frame for it at all. So plotting would be the biggest struggle. And question number 10 is, what is your best writing skill? Again, I'm assuming we're talking about fiction here. If we're talking about nonfiction, especially book reviews, my biggest writing skill is to be interesting on my own, irrespective of what I'm reviewing, which I think is the duty of all book reviewers, but so many book reviewers forget that duty. So many of them do. I just recently finished reading the latest TLS, Times Literary Supplement, that I got in the mail. Quite a few of the reviewers in that Times Literary Supplement forgot that most basic thing in the world, that they must also be entertaining. They must also be good reading. It doesn't matter that what you have to say. It doesn't only matter what you have to say about the book you're reviewing. It also matters how you say it. And so when it comes to book reviews, that I think would be my biggest skill, is that I like to think I don't write a boring book review. My latest, I'll try to remember to leave a link to my latest review in the Martha's Vineyard Gazette of a book, one of those little slim History of America volumes with archival photos about the various different kinds of travel, not only to the vineyard, but also on the vineyard, subway cars, street cars, railway line. And you look at that thing, you look at what the book is, you hold it in your hand, you've seen them, very slim. The Images of America series is the most popular example. There are archival black and white photos of, you know, men standing in front of horse-drawn carriages or whatnot. You might look at that and think, okay, well, you can point out some of the interesting details. You can basically synopsize the content, but you can't make an interesting review out of this. And I did. I did make it. Now, part of that is your help by having a wonderful editor, who will, in this case, by wonderful editor, I do not mean someone who will punch up my prose. Okay, I don't like my editors to touch my prose. But a wonderful editor in terms of, okay, I trust you now, so you can have all the leeway you want. That is great. And if I remember, I'll leave a link to that review. But if we talk about fiction, if we're not talking about book reviews or nonfiction, if we're talking about fiction here for best writing skill, I think mine would, it's tough to tell. When you're the one doing the assessing, it's tough to tell. But I think my best writing skill would be an ability to avoid static scenes. I hate reading static scenes, and I don't like to write them either. I like a scene to have a feel of headlong momentum, so that you, the reader, are never questioning whether or not to keep reading. Even if it's a sit-down scene in conversation, I still like it to be that. So I work to make sure that's true. I hope I succeed. Then question number 11 is, if you've been on YouTube for a while, what is your best AuthorTube tip? And my best AuthorTube tip was also my best tip for writing before there was such a thing as AuthorTube or YouTube. And authors typically don't like to hear it. And that is work. Generate material. GM, generate material. If you don't write every day, if you don't put aside the time and generate actual prose, then none of the rest of it matters. None of it does. Not your idea, not your moment of inspiration, not, your dead teacher. Nothing like that matters. None of it does, unless you are generating prose. The whole point here is to generate prose. And I know so many wannabe writers who think that they can't generate prose until they know it will be perfect. I must wait until I am a vessel that someone must speak through. Only garbage comes out the other end when that is true, and besides, what you're writing is in all cases a first draft, so that kind of idea is just a waste of time. It's a way for you to avoid committing. So my number one piece of advice is get to work. Get to work. Not later this week, not once the kids go back to school. Now, today, get to work today. Rattling around in your head has been the idea for a novel, or a memoir, or even a work of history. It does nobody any good up there, including you. Take a piece of paper, pad of paper, and open a screen on your computer and write down all of your current thoughts on that thing. Or if the thoughts are a little more advanced, start writing an outline. Or if the outline is advanced, then start work on the book. Today, now. Start work today, now, on what you're writing. And work on it every single day with no days off until it's finished. And then send it to me. And question number 13 is, the reason we're going from 11 to 13 is because there was another alternate question there at 11. 12 was if you're new to YouTube, and I'm not. So we're going to skip on to 13. Are you looking for any new channels to follow in terms of writing or advice or beta readers or anything like that? And of course my answer is yes, I am, absolutely. Samuel calls for people to start exchanging recommendations in the comments field. I wholeheartedly second that. If you have writing channels that you think I might like, feel free to tell me all about them, because as much YouTube watching as I do, I'm sure I miss a lot. So sound off. And when it comes to the natural end point of this tag, which is tagging other people, I'm going to remind you of a point that Sean the Book Maniac made on a recent video of his, which is that maybe we should get away from that. Maybe all tags should be an all-encompassing call for all of us to do them if we want to. And I agree with that. So if you're part of AuthorTube, or if you're part of BookTube and you want to be part of AuthorTube, and you like these questions, this is the AuthorTube Newbie Tag 2.0. So don't do this unless you've done 1.0. Who was it? Who? Jen Street? Or I don't remember who did AuthorTube Newbie Tag, the original. But make sure you do that first, and also make sure you tell me. If you do this tag or the first tag or both, make sure you tell me in the comments of this video and link it so that I can go and find you. So anyway, that's it. That was a tag for today. I loved it. I hope you all do it. And I'll leave a link to Samuel's video down below. But I'll be back. We have lots of other bookish stuff to talk about. Thank you, BookTube.